Convention, so you've seen him several times. And if you've been in this diocese, you know Terry as being a chaplain every day of the week. He's a wonderful person, a fabulous priest and pastor. He's the executive director of Paths to Understanding, and for several years, with the blessing of the Diocese of Olympia, all of you, and the Northwest Washington Synod of the ELCA, he has been working counter anti-Muslim hate groups since about 2015. Terry has served within the Episcopal Church since 2004 and in the Lutheran Church since 1991. We have a panel today, but I'm going to turn it over to Terry as moderator, and he will lead us through this discussion. Terry, thank you. To the panel, I say thank you and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bishop Rickel, and thank you for your support to me as I was considering starting Neighbors in Faith and leaving parish ministry. I just really appreciated your help and support, and even helping us to come up with that name, Neighbors in Faith. And I want to welcome everyone today to a listening circle of voices in the wilderness, people of color experiences of pain and perseverance in the Episcopal Church. Before we begin our conversation, I invite the Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton, who is Chicon First Nation, to introduce Circles of Color.
Thank you very much, and I want to begin by thanking Bishop Rickel for the opportunity that we have today to share story and to work toward deep relationship as a diocese. And I thank him also for inviting Brad Hoff to be with us at our convention. And I want to welcome and thank Brad for the gift of his presentation this morning on behalf of Ethnic Ministries Circles of Color. I am very privileged as coordinator for Circles of Color to be working with people who are among some of the most courageous, spiritual, and dedicated that I have known. And I am deeply grateful to those who've agreed to participate in the panel today. And as they speak, I hear the voices of ancestors, and I hear the draw to the future and the dream that we can share together. So thank you, all my relations, for being here today. Terry.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So we're going to begin our conversation in prayer. Becky Clark will now lead us in a prayer shared by Circles of Color when they meet. Becky.
Good morning to all. Thank you, Terry. Dikea ang kau kail kaatawutsigu. The Lord be with you and also with you. Let us pray. Holy God, creator of the earth upon which we walk together, may this time and this place be holy ground for our hope and faith. May we care for those entrusted to this circle. May this circle be a space of safety, peace, healing, and hope. Holy God, creator of everything our eyes behold, may we dance together in this sacred circle of diversity. May we hear each other's song as we journey together. May we celebrate our oneness as children of one God. Holy God, creator and guide, may we be advocates of repentance, reconciliation, and justice. May we be a circle of love, acceptance, and respect. With patience, may we bind each other's wounds, realize our dreams, and together transform our world. Amen.
Becky, thank you so much for grounding us in prayer. A few years ago, a woman asked for a meeting with me. She shared with me that I had said something that had been painful for her. Of course, it was hard to hear. But I held fast to my baptism in that moment and remembered that I was held in God's steadfast embrace, even when I fall short of love. She did not call me out. She called me in to a deeper and more honest relationship with her. I realized as she spoke that she was risking a lot to share this pain with me. I realized that by sharing her pain with me, she was trusting me. Her sharing was an act of love for herself, for the church, and for me. And we were all made better for it. Today, fellow members of the body of Christ will share some stories of pain and hope with us. Let us hold fast to our baptism and remember that we are held in God's steadfast embrace, even when, and maybe particularly when, we fall short of love. Our friends are not calling us out, but calling us in to be more fully the body of Christ in this time and this place. Sharing their stories with us today is an act of trust and love. For those who listen at home, I know it would be easier if we were all together. We could look forward to sharing the living peace of Christ embodied in one another and in the Eucharist. Remember that the Spirit's presence is with you, and the Spirit is with the panel. And that means that we are bound together in ways that go beyond our understanding. But also, please understand this. It is taking a great deal for our panel to share with us today. Sharing with us means that they are reliving traumatic experiences, feeling the fear and the grief and the impact of those experiences in their lives. Sharing with us means potential risk to relationships within our communion, not knowing how we may respond. Sharing with us means potential risk to their career and reputations, as they could become known only for their pain and not for their whole self and all the gifts they bring. Some are not ready to share yet because the pain is too intense, but may one day share their experience with us. So today I'll be asking 3 questions. Our panel will respond to the questions they each have chosen to speak to. So friends on the panel, I'm so grateful for your vulnerability and your courage and your trust in us and your love for the church. And so I'd like to begin with Carlos. Carlos, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Well, as a licensed priest in this diocese, I'm happy to be a parishioner. And after the rector decided I was not a heretic, an associate at Holy Cross Redmond. It's a wonderful, warm, spiritual, fun-loving, and active parish with many outreach programs, including a farm that produces thousands of tons of food for the hungry. I'm honored to do occasional supply work at Resurrection and Holy Apostles Bellevue. I recently was found by the Circles of Color. It is a joy to find a home with my Black, Indigenous, people of color brothers and sisters. It means the world to me. I lived in a diocese that was not progressive, was not inclusive, and not in step with the national church. What I value about this diocese is that it strives to be progressive and open, to look at itself, to admit mistakes, and to grow. We have the capacity to examine and educate ourselves about how Black, Indigenous, people of color can be hurt by what we all do and what we say. We have the capacity to work towards becoming a beloved community. Although we're not there yet, we've made a start. And this is the hope that I have for all of us. And it is this start and this hope that I love.
Carlos, thank you so much. Deborah, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Good morning. I am a proud cradle Episcopalian and have been part of this diocese for nearly 30 years. What I love about my church is that there are many people that I consider to be family, and throughout the time that I've been here and moved here from the East Coast, I am happy to say that I've been included in their family as well, and the relationships that I have created within the church and our diocese are a treasure to me, and that is what I love about the Episcopal Church. Thank you very much, Terry.
Deborah, thank you. And Katya, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Thank you, Terry. I am a convert. I grew up in a very fundamentalist Baptist church. So I've just loved that my voice as a young woman is appreciated, that I've been given the opportunity to preach. And I'm so thankful for members, even in the bishop's office, who value me and give me space to speak in situations. So I am very, very grateful for that. I am so also thankful to know so many wonderful people in this diocese, especially in the last few months, which have been incredibly difficult for people of color, and just the amount of support I've gotten from people. And also I've been struck by people in leadership who are willing to acknowledge the harm that they have done to me and to other people of color, as well as their willingness to grow, to listen, and to be transformed by the Spirit.
Katya, thank you so much. And Lillian, what do you love about being a part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Thank you. I also am a cradle Episcopalian, and I have been attending the St. Matthew San Mateo in Auburn since December of 1977. It is a warm, welcoming, diverse, loving congregation. It is home. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. And I'd like to invite Vicki to answer this question. What do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Good morning. What I love, being part of a member of the Episcopal Church is, as a member of San Matthew Church at Tabor, I have What I value about being part of the Episcopal Church is that in general, it is a progressive community that is involved in social justice and struggles and actively participate in making decisions about what they think is better for the human beings. Also, the people who are part of this spiritual community has an open mind to welcome people without distinction of race, color, immigration status, sexual preference, economic level, and who give the opportunity to people of different sexual preference to serve as spiritual guides. I also value that they welcome me and my family to be part of the spiritual family on San Matthew.
Vicki, thank you so much. And Adrian, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you to all of the panelists for sharing today. I really love the Diocese of Olympia and its open embrace in theology. Even though we may feel short of actually making everyone in all of their identities feel welcome all the time, I hold on to our commitment to sit with the both ands: science and faith, tradition and newness, mystery and knowing. I love that we, as the communion of saints, are part of a bigger church with a history that, for better or worse, we all have to wrestle with and account for. The Diocese of Olympia, and specifically my home parish of St. Paul's, Seattle, have created space for me to experience God through Eucharistic, incarnational community, and the remembering of our fractures as we work out how to be God's people together. And I am forever grateful for the Circles of Color. It's been my spiritual lifeline these last few months.
Adrian, thank you so much. And Greg, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Well, I've got some stories to tell that, well, first of all, I grew up in a small tourist trap town in Wisconsin where we had both kinds of people, Polish people and German people. And when I moved out here to Washington State as a young man, and I've been here my whole entire adult life, I went to the Evergreen State College and I attended St. John's in Olympia. And what I noticed right away when I got there were two things. First of all, the gospel was read in Khmer and in English, because that congregation, through the work of Ruthie Schmidt, had sponsored several Cambodian families, refugee families from the Khmer Rouge genocide. And then the other thing I noticed was in the very first row were a group of people from a sheltered community with people with developmental disabilities. And they were right in the front row, and they were honored, and they participated, and I got to know a young man named Dwayne. And as my younger brother is intellectually disabled, so I felt so much at home in that place. Such a rich diversity. A couple of other stories histories from this diocese, which I want to hold up, are Don Maddox, priest in Shelton, who, though he knows zero Spanish, when he saw the need for Spanish ministry in Shelton, started a Spanish language service, an Episcopal service. Another story is from Tim Nakayama, the rector at St. Peter's in Seattle. During the war, when Japanese Americans were interned, the people of St. Peter's left their belongings, which they couldn't take to the internment camps, the concentration camps. And when they needed things, after they got there and discovered they needed some stuff, they would write to Bishop Houston, and he would personally go down there and find their stuff and find the very thing they needed and sent it back to them. I love that story. The other thing that I'm so happy about, so proud of this diocese for, is, when I was raised up as to be ordained, the day I was ordained with Sam Lee, the first Cambodian postulant and ordinand, and Connie Moorhead, African American, and Anna Maria Karathu of Indian extraction, East Indian extraction, along with Doug Simonson, another white guy like me. I'm so proud of our diversity. I'm so honored to be part of that. And then later I got to work with Jerry Shigaki and Richard Young. And lastly, I want to hold up Lori Pruitt from this community I serve now, St. Albans Edmonds, who was so involved and such a strong supporter of the Refugee Resettlement Office. These are the things that make me proud and glad and joyous to be part of this this diocese and this church.
Greg, thank you so much. And Ruth Ann, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Well, as some of you may know, I'm fairly new to the diocese, and I'm just really, really happy to be back in the Northwest. And I feel so blessed to work at Epiphany Parish in Seattle with my great colleague, Joy Kahn, and so many other wonderful staff people. So I spent almost 20 years, I'm originally from Montana, probably over 20 years, but 20 years in ministry on the East Coast. And that was, of course, wonderful and such a great opportunity. But I missed home. And I think the thing I love about the Diocese of Olympia is that the people are amazing. So the Seattle freeze never happened to me. My congregants were amazing. Right away, I think within my first couple of weeks, 2 colleagues reached out to me, female colleagues, and asked me if I wanted to be in a group with them. And so we meet once a month. That doesn't happen in every diocese. That's pretty extraordinary. And I walked with those colleagues during those early days. And of course, several months ago, I was reached out to by Carla Robinson, and she even came and had coffee with me, and we had a great time. and asked and told about our work with the circles of color. And that's been really meaningful to have this group in this difficult time. And I'm just really super thankful to this group. And I also got to meet with the bishop right away. Like, he invited me to come see him in the first couple months. So it's a wonderful and welcoming diocese. And I think it reflects the best of the Northwest and the West itself, because we still have the remnants of the indigenous cultures and the welcoming and the love for nature and things that is a little bit harder on the East Coast. So I'm just glad to be here.
Ruth Ann, thank you so much. And lastly, I'd like to ask Becky, what do you love about being part of the Diocese of Olympia?
Good morning, Terry. Thank you. As a cradle Episcopalian and a military wife, I love that I have been able to go anywhere in the country to any Episcopal church and find familiarity. I knew the Episcopal aerobics would be the same: stand, sit, sing, kneel, repeat. Well, the homes and schools and scout groups changed. I knew the Episcopal Church would always be a welcome note of home. And especially these days, the circles of color in this particular diocese have been the greatest help for the last several months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky, and to everyone who shared so far. So now I want to start off with Ruth Ann with a question. What harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover from it?
Thank you, Terry. Again, my name is the Reverend Ruth Ann Garcia, and I'm going to start a little bit about my experience, because I think that leads in a little bit to the Episcopal Church part of that question. I'm a second generation American through my grandparents on both sides. So I have a grandfather from England and one from Spain. I became an Episcopalian. It was just the way it turned out because of the English grandfather. But both of my grandmother's families have been here for a very long time. One was a daughter of the American Revolution, so was one of the first settlers who came. And the other was what she always would say, nothing more than this, an original Texan, by which, of course, she would mean that she was from the indigenous people of Texas. And I would say that for me, I am an example of how the melting pot did not work, right? I grew up in a town, very small town in Montana. My grandparents wanted me to be an American. So they didn't teach me Spanish. They didn't teach me any of their other languages. And they did not talk about any of that stuff. It was like it was totally cut off. And so again, I'm an example of that failed notion of the melting pot metaphor for American citizens. It did not work. Basically, I never became, whatever that American stew or fondue is or whatever. I've never experienced that. I've always been sort of picked out as that morsel that didn't fit. Sadly, of course, what that means is that in my grandparents' attempt to protect me from the suffering that they felt, they left me without any resources in a 99% white town. So what my experience has been is that while folks will always ask me where I'm from, in my experience, folks will then correct me about where I'm from or tell me what my experience should be. So I grew up with a lot of things like, where's your family from? I would explain. They would say, oh, so you're this. And I'd say no. And they'd say, well, that's the same thing. So that's been my experience of that. I would say that this continues, sadly, even to this day, although now I don't think I define myself that way. I think it's interesting in the Episcopal Church, and, my grandfather came from England. He was the poor one, the Spanish grandfather lost a fortune here. But I became an Episcopalian through my grandfather. But I think one of the things we can't get away from, like when we look around at our church, we see that this system was not made for us, right? This system still revels, and I'm a high church person, but it revels in that, that British English sort of thing, that Anglophile sort of thing. And so we don't really know what to do with all the others. And so we'll assign folks to whatever little thing we think they should. So when you look around and you don't see a lot of people of color, that's the best proof that that system isn't working for those people. And it hits for many, of us sort of mid-career. When you first get out of seminary, you may be placed, but as you go up the ladder, and now we're actually seeing more bishops of color than we are clergy of color in large congregations, it becomes problematic. So those are the sorts of things I've seen in 22 years. And just, the constant, you don't look like a priest, you can't your family can't possibly be Sephardic because people who are Jewish don't have Spanish surnames. So that's just kind of the things that we deal with all the time. But what I would say is that I have seen great change in these 22 years. And I am so thankful for all of my colleagues here because I believe that we can be that change. And so thank you for listening. And I hope that I hope I bring something that blesses someone in some way.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann. And now I'd like to ask Lillian, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Okay. I grew up at the Church of the Holy Communion in the Hilltop area of Tacoma. In the mid-'60s and, to the early 70s, that church became more and more Black. And because we were a mission, the then Bishop Curtis, I think, sent us a priest, a white South African priest. It was not a good fit. And 10 years later, the church was closed. One of the things that we did to cope was that we continued to be the Church of the Holy Communion. Sorry. I didn't think I was going to do this. Okay. And meeting together at least once a year for 20 years. Later, my husband and I joined the first, I think, Diocesan Anti-Racism Committee. Thank you.
Lillian, thank you so much for the story you shared and for being so vulnerable with us. Next, I'd like to ask Adrian, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope or recover from it?
Thanks, Terry. And thank you, Lillian and Ruth Ann, for sharing. While I have experienced much joy and belonging, I have also experienced deep pain and othering in this church. I wept the first time I saw the female priest administer the sacraments at St. Paul's, as other LGBTQ+ priests and lay members served beside her in 2015. They were all white, but represented the Christian openness, love, and affirmation I had been craving to witness and be a part of. These past few months have been filled with lots more tears and lament, listening to the stories from our BIPOC lay and clergy and diaspora, lay and clergy diaspora represented in the circles of color. My identification with others who have felt similarly tokenized or not Anglo enough has been cathartic. After continual interactions being confused with one of the only other young women of color in my parish, being asked where we're from, or feeling like we are consistently some of the only people in leadership conversations coming from a lens that centers the dignity of the other, I've come to see that my pain has been buried deep, a survival mechanism I've been using to function in a predominantly white parish and institution. In college, my friends of color enjoyed the contemplative and embodied experience of our worship, but they never came back because it was too white. They didn't feel welcome. Over the years, I've wondered if I could keep compartmentalizing my love for my parish and unique worship style with the longing I felt to be fully seen and known in communities of color. I yearned for representation and seeing people who looked like me in the pews and administering the sacraments. And I'm happy to say that the history and truth-telling that I have witnessed and the unmovable ways BIPOC leaders and allies, my elders, have embodied their commitment to racial equity has reaffirmed my belief in our church and in our diocese. Their stories have also given me the courage to continue discerning my own call, something I hope other discerners of color can experience. The sense of belonging and alienation from the church has led me here. I'm fourth generation Japanese American, though my grandparents and even though my great grandparents and even grandparents were born in the Kingdom of Hawaii before statehood. I'm mixed race, Japanese and white. And though the matriarchs in my family, my mom and her mom, were baptized, married, and had my siblings and I baptized in this church, I didn't grow up in a parish and only found my way back to this tradition in college. So part of my own healing has come from hearing stories from other Japanese Anglicans all over who navigated their faith communities after internment. Remembering for me the stories my grandparents don't like to tell. Ultimately, I know we have a long way to go in journeying together and letting BIPOC folks know that yesterday are a crucial first step towards practicing the radical hospitality that is required of us, and I look forward to our reimagined road ahead together. Thank you.
Adrienne, thank you so very much. And I'd like to now invite Hisako to join us in conversation around what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover? Hisako is working to unmute herself right now. Just give her 1 minute. So Hisako, while you figure that out, I'm going to move on to Alan and then I'll come back to you. Okay. So Alan, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Well, good morning, my sisters and brothers. A little bit of my history. I'm Potawatomi, Citizen Nation Potawatomi and Cherokee. I grew up in Oklahoma. One of my best friends in grade school was a guy named Dean Tiger, who was a full-blood Creek. His brother George became the principal chief of the Creeks. So I walk in both worlds. I'm white and I'm indigenous native. I know what it's like to see things from both sides of the street. I've experienced things. I know racism when I see it. In this diocese, I have not really seen implicit racism or explicit racism. What I have seen and experienced is what I would call cultural ignorance or systemic indifference. When I talk to people and I let them know that of my heritage, a lot of times, this has happened quite a few times, they came back and say, well, what do you people want? You have casinos, you have all this money coming in, what else is there? What more do you want from us? And so this is when I come back and say, that's not the issue. That's not what we're talking about. I try to tell them a little bit about the history of this country, the things that have gone on, the things that have happened. I said, what we want is recognition. We want to be seen as people. My ancestors were part of the Trail of Tears that marched from Georgia to Oklahoma. People died. And this is where it comes in with the cultural indifference and the systemic ignorance. I want to impart knowledge to them, to let them know what life is actually like for a good portion of this country. Now, what I've done, well, Bishop Rickle this past year asked me to be the chair of the Land Acknowledgement Task Force in the diocese. I'm honored to have that position. I was really glad to hear Brad this morning talk about land acknowledgement. That's what we want to do. I think it's great. We have wonderful, wonderful people in this diocese. And I think for the most part, it's just making people aware of this country's actual history, not the sanitized version you see in the old westerns and movies, but the reality. That's what I like.
Thank you so much, Alan, and thank you for stepping in there. And now I'd like to have Hisako share with us what harm she may have experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church and what work you've done to cope and or recover.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, first of all, I am, obviously you can see I'm Japanese, person of color, but then I married to African-American man and raised 3 kids in early 70s. This was intentional for me. I wanted to work and get involved in racial justice, racial injustice in the United States. So that's how I started this journey. And what harm, well, in the mid-90s at the Diocesan Convention, there was an issue about multicultural issue came up, and I have to make a presentation at the convention. And before to prepare, I went to a diocesan office and talked to a pretty high-ranking clergy on the staff at the diocesan office. And I don't see any person of color on the staff at the diocesan office. And his response was, but Hisako, we have Mr. Ki, who is Korean. And when I heard that, my heart sank. And immediately, instantly interpret that response as the whole climate, whole attitude of the diocesan office, because Mr. Ki, the keychain, you heard his name for the award, but Mr. Ki was not Korean. He was Chinese. So here, for this priest, Korean, Chinese, what's the difference? Kind of attitude that I totally interpreted. And I felt very, very disappointed and sad, and especially to the respect for Mr. Ki Chang. So that just kind of, and how I recover the moments, obviously this is more than 25 years ago, I don't think I have. And I'm still remembering, first thing I thought about your question, I said, yeah, that was a big one. Of course, I had other big ones too, but it just, I've been carrying that climate of the diocese is the harm in even my spiritual life, and some sort of doubt in government of the church. Thank you.
Zaka, thank you so much. And Katya, what harm have you experienced within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
I'm Filipino white, and it's Filipino American History Month this month, and it's a really, really tough time for the Filipino community right now. And I don't want to talk about it because most people are just completely oblivious to the ongoing colonial relationship between the United States and the Philippines. And even talking about it, I had to get into that conversation, and it's just so painful. And so I really respect and thank you, Reverend Bradley Haw, for taking the time to talk about those stories, because it's so hard. And I don't have the strength to do that. So I acknowledge that and thank you. I don't really experience racism for being Filipino because I am misread as being Latina, Indigenous, or Middle Eastern. And it's been shocking in our diocese to hear what people assume of those people. And I just don't know how to process it. And so I'm still in this place of I don't know how to speak to those situations because I'm just so floored by it. And my husband has been very helpful in helping me navigate what it is they're actually assuming. And my husband's white, so he understands. And I think in general, I know BIPOC people who have left the Diocese of Olympia and have left the Episcopal Church totally because of experiences both implicit and explicit in our churches. And I am often the only person of color in spaces. When I do family ministry gatherings or youth ministry gatherings, or young adult gatherings, I'm often the only person of color. And when I try to bring up racism, I've been told, now's not the time to talk about race. Race is too complex. It is a separate issue. And that's a struggle. And I think our diocese struggles with this idea of intersectionality. I cannot separate my experience as a young woman and a Filipina, as an immigrant, somebody who is trying to work through internalized colonial mindsets. I cannot separate that from any of those other parts of my identity. That's who I am as a whole. And so what I've done to help me cope is I pay out of pocket for a Filipina therapist who's also Tagalog, which is my mom's people. And I pay out of pocket because she's not covered by our insurance. And most people, there are so many amazing therapists of color in Seattle and in this area that are not covered by our insurance. But I pay out of pocket so that I could have someone speak to my unique experiences. I also connect with the circles of color, and I just feel so seen and held there. And I have connected with Asian American and Filipina social organizations and groups just to help me find balance to the dominant white culture. And then sometimes if I have time, I'll just join a community in our diocese that doesn't have English as the language they use for their service. And it's just so nice to be in a place where you don't have to accommodate for English or the Anglo culture. Thank you.
Katya, thank you so much. And Deborah, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Thank you. My story is an example, is one of many examples where a fellow parishioner or parishioner within my church has felt that they were acting in love and in my best interest. However, their actions were more hurtful and intrusive. An example, at one time, there was a time when I was single at the time, and I was not in attendance on a particular Sunday. And a male newcomer, African American, had come to the church. This particular parishioner had spoken to this single African American male. And because I was also single and African American at the time, and at the time at the church, I was the only African American in attendance, at least at that service, and for mostly in the church, felt that and a single African American male and myself would be a good match. They proceeded to give this person who's a stranger my personal information, home address, and phone number from the church directory without my consent. When I returned to church the next week, the parishioner informed me of what they had done, and that it was an act of love and of concern for me. However, I actually felt harmed and violated, that they would take it upon themselves to act as some kind of advocate for as a matchmaker, and even just give anyone my consent and in my personal information without consent. And or you'd even assume that any African American male that walked inside the church would be any kind of a match for me. I cope. Well, what helps is, as Katya said, is being part of this circle of color is helpful. Also having my rector, Rachel, as somebody who can understand when these incidents occur, that how I would feel, and that it is a violation. And also, as a side story to that, is I am now married, and I'm married to a male who is not a person of color. So that is kind of how that story is continuing. And I now also with parishioners, when there's when they act in this manner, I usually try and set boundaries of letting them know that this is probably not okay. And I am happy and blessed that I have a circle of color and friends that I can go to for support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for your story. And now I want to ask Carla, what harm have you experienced with or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
I've always loved the way that the Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Olympia value speaking the truth. We tell the truth even when it's painful. We tell the truth about the plague of gun violence in our nation. We tell the truth about the pain of people experiencing homelessness and poverty. We tell the truth about racial injustice. So, bolstered by this love of truth, I would share a story of harm. It may surprise some of you to know that there was once a thriving Black Episcopal congregation in Seattle. It was called the Church of the Advent. The mission was founded in the mid-1940s in Seattle Central area, but in 1958, the congregation closed by Bishop Bain. Stated reason was to end segregation in churches. The intention was good. Sadly, the impact was not. Many members did go to other congregations, but many others just left the Episcopal Church altogether. In several cases, the furnishings, altar paraments, chancel appointments, and other significant items of the church were removed without consultation with the families that had donated or purchased them. The pain was immense. Now, this happened 60 years ago, and I wasn't here for it. So how in the world does that harm me? Well, it has harmed me because it deprived me of a potential community that could have deepened my welcome into and broadened my experience of the Episcopal Church. It harmed me because it leaves me with a lingering legacy of distrust and disenfranchisement. It harms me because that story is still there and I still hear it and it keeps resurfacing. So, what am I doing to cope and heal? Well, first off, I'm telling the story of Advent in every context in which it is appropriate. Telling the story helps me cope with the harm. Having people hear it and share its pain and be able to say, I didn't know, have been helpful for me. Second, I use the story as an inspiration for the work that I'm doing now as the gatherer of the African American Circle, which is one of our circles of color. I do this work as part of the larger work of regathering the beloved community. I do this work to build a community of healing and truth-telling that can be a blessing to African American folk and a blessing to the Episcopal Diocese of Olympia, to raise the visibility and the great blessing that God has given to all peoples, to create a community where, again, we can celebrate saints such as Absalom Jones, celebrate occasions like Juneteenth, mourn when there is hurt and murder and people dying in our communities, to have a place to lament and a place to have joy. That's one story of harm that is not just mine, but many, and one way in which I'm hoping and healing. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you so much, Carla. And now I want to ask Vicki to unmute and show her video. And I'll ask her this: what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Okay. As a member of St. Matthew's Church of Tabor, I have witnessed and experienced myself oppression against some women, including myself, by a priest who was the spiritual leader some years ago. For that reason, I was disappointed in the lack of support for women by some members of the St. Matthew's community, as well as by the diocese. And I was especially disappointed by the decision that were made in favor of the priest. As a consequence, some members of the Latino community left the church because they were afraid of that priest, Antonio Ilas. He was a former immigrant agent and active in the United States Armed Forces. So people expressed fear and began affected by his immigration status. After this event, most of the members who speak Spanish stopped attending. Myself, I have had a very strong struggles between staying in my spiritual community, of which I am a member for around 14 years, and which my daughter grew up. I was especially worried about my daughter because she's vulnerable. She's a girl. She is, we are indigenous, and she is a member of a Mexican immigrant family. So before this happened, I was sure that it was a safety and healthy place for her. But after that, I wasn't sure. So I also was very proud about my community, and every time I was inviting people to join our community. But after that situation, I stopped doing that because I am not sure. I wasn't sure if this was a safety place for them. So what I had to do to cope with that, what happened and recover, has been to try to understand that some people make wrong decisions, and I want to think that they did it without the intention of affecting. If they do, I try to understand that they are humans and have the right to make mistakes. So I have decided to stay and be a member of this congregation, because some of them was really supportive with me and my family. And I have decided to fight against those feelings of disappointment and abandonment that I feel when they did not support us and allow the abuse and intimidation to continue.
Vicki, thank you so much for what you shared. Edie, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover from it?
Thank you, Terry. I want to thank the members of this panel and the members of the Circles of Color. I am not a person of color, and I'm grateful for this opportunity as an ally and a longtime friend, I hope, to share a story of a shared experience here in the diocese. For the better part of 20 years, I've been involved with 3 generations of what I will call the anti-racism training team. We had many different names, but I'll go with that one today. We came together not as a group of professional trainers, but out of a shared commitment to do something about racism in our own lives and in the church that we attend and serve and in the community around us. We were a diverse group of people. When I think about the faces around that table where we gathered, there were members representing many different races and ethnicities, different ages, young and old, different genders. We were lay and clergy. We came from many different parts of the country, many different parts of the church, and had many, many different experiences. And as we met month after month around that big table in the center of D House, as we planned and debriefed for the work that we had been given, we became a community. And we did that by telling stories about our lives, by listening to the stories of one another, by sharing our joys and our questions and our conflicts and our everydayness, and also by sharing many experiences of pain, which were most often grounded in issues and experiences of racism. Over time, we became increasingly willing as individuals to be vulnerable and to go deeper and to learn from and with one another across our differences, and because of our differences, really live into those differences. And so it was in that way that we got to know and to love one another. When we went out to share training, we went out purposefully as cross-cultural or multiracial teams. We went out 4 by 4 in most cases. And we went out with the goal not of branding or shaming people around racism. We went out to share our experience of the breadth and depth of God's love that we had come to know around that table and to share with others. We went out to invite people to live more deeply into the baptismal covenant, which was why we had come to that table, to seek and serve Christ in all others, and to respect the dignity and to work for justice of all peoples. With others who shared that experience together over those many years, more than 2 decades, I have mourned the loss of this opportunity for collaboration and way of living out our Christian mission. And since then, I have sought other opportunities to continue in that work, because the work is still here to do. And I have sought that and been a part of that in my congregation of St. Mark's Cathedral in a very substantive way. And in the last few months, through the Circles of Color, I've been a part of both the Clergy Circle and the Ally Circle, and I'm deeply grateful for that. These have been places in both settings, not of just getting together to air grievances or to remember the past for its own sake, but as places where we can tell the truth and share pain and share joy and hope for the future. They're places of hospitality and healing. And we're there because the mission and the call remain. And we want to be part of that with you.
Edie, thank you very much. And Becky, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope or recover from it?
Thank you, Terry. As a member of St. Matthew San Mateo in Auburn and of the First Nations Committee, we experienced both groups have had the misfortune of having leadership that didn't understand their respective communities. And thank you to Vicki, whose story and mine meshed together as we were both from St. Matthew San Mateo. I have learned from friends that what we call the Spanish language is very specific to regions. So just because you speak Spanish here does not mean someone over there will fully understand what you're saying. And I've also learned that Puerto Rican friends have admitted that they have a bit of disdain for Mexicans. So when an ICE agent, retired or not, was sent to St. Matthew, it was a great fear for the immigrant community. A sad combination, and I no longer felt safe or welcome there. When my husband was deployed, I was a single mother and quite independent. So I didn't tolerate well a patriarchal demand for obedience, nor the lack of discussion without resorting immediately to the canons. I had to walk away. I have been searching for a church home for over 3 years. I have found acceptance and care at St. Columba's in Kent. These days I join their virtual worship, but there will always be a St. Matthew-sized hole in my heart. And virtually, I also find solace for my soul at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. For Indian, Indigenous, First Nations Committee, whatever you wish to call us, we have a 500-year history of patriarchal, non-Indigenous control and subjugation. We had been emailing committee members to have the non-Indigenous chairperson relinquish control at the end of her elected term, which was at that point right then. We had been polite and hinted, and finally outright asked her to step down. Somehow what started out as a committee discussion expanded and blew up in our faces, and there was no longer a Diocesan First Nations Committee. Again, I had to walk apart, but these people are my family, my clan. We keep in contact via email, Zoom, or old-fashioned telephone calls, and the Circles of Color have been blessing beyond blessing. Thank you.
Becky, thank you. And I want to ask Jim, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Thank you, Terry. I'm Jim Campbell, and I'm a lifelong Episcopalian, white Episcopalian, who originally grew up in an all-white central Indiana county. And for the past 45 years, I have lived and worshiped in the Diocese of Olympia. My focus with this question has to do with unintended consequences. As a member of the Budget and Finance Committee for the past 16 years, I've seen firsthand what has been done over those years in the interest of lowering diocesan assessments from 20% to 18% in 2007, down to 14.5% starting in 2019. Budget and Finance did this with the idea of keeping more funds in the congregations, while still having enough money coming from assessments for the diocesan budget to continue to operate well enough. Also, there were 2 diocesan-wide program surveys taken in 2008 and 10, which resulted in low marks given for priorities for ethnic ministries. I believe these together produced an effect over time to prioritize some ministries and staff positions over others, like ethnic ministries. And as a result, cuts to ethnic ministries' budget funds and staff occurred. I feel really badly for how this played out over the past 10 years, and I hope we will find ways to correct this in our future budget and finance budget activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And Carlos, what harm have you experienced or witnessed within the Episcopal Church, and what work have you done to cope and or recover?
Well, I'm a proud Filipino, Puerto Rican, American Episcopalian. When I was an aspirant for Holy Orders back in the 60s, I was told that my ministry would have to be limited because of prejudice in the Episcopal Church, because of the color of my skin. I remember one time presiding at the Requiem Mass of one of my very best friends. And the eulogist got up and extolled my friend for being open and accepting of everybody. And he said, why, he even had a Filipino friend. This happens all the time. Every time I go someplace, people look at me and say, where are you from? Not a whole lot of white people go up to other white people and say, where are you from? All the time. You feel like you're not really part of anything. I know people who have left the church because of maybe some unintended words that were said that really hurt that person. Now, I know we've made some strides since I was ordained, but the hurt is still there. It doesn't easily go away. I got to tell you, it just cuts the very heart of my existence and makes me feel that maybe I'm not as valid as a white person. So how did I deal with this? I did it by making love a verb. When in my ministry, I headed a grassroots organization of mostly Black and people of color. We built housing units for lower and middle income people in New York. I helped establish the Chinese church. I helped pass a resolution at a general convention to establish the first Latino desk at the Episcopal Church Center. I got gassed at demonstrations. I ran healthcare institutions in the South Bronx that cared for the poor and people of color. And I ran healthcare institutions in Michigan. Along the way, though, I adapted to and was enfolded into the majority culture, and I served several white congregations. I'm blessed to have the support and love of a wonderful family and many friends. And now I have friends in the circle of color. racism does not define me. And I hope that what I have done and will continue to do will make a difference in people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you everyone for responding to the second question. And now we're going to move on to the third, which is, what could the diocese do to continue to more fully become the beloved community? And I'd like to start off with Katya for this question.
Thank you. I just want to quote the Reverend Carla when she talked yesterday. These resolutions that we passed are but sticking your toe in the Puget Sound and calling it an ocean. We have to keep in mind that there's a long way to go. And I would just say the most important thing is just building meaningful relationships with BIPOC people and BIPOC communities. I am married to a white man who loves me so deeply and gets so angry anytime something racist happens towards me, and his first instinct is to run and fix it. And I always have to say to him, slow down. I need you to sit with me. I need you to be with me. Be here. And that is my invitation to my white siblings in this church. Sit here, be with me.
Thank you so much, Katya. Greg, what could the diocese do to more fully become the beloved community?
Well, I want to piggyback on what Katya just said. A few years ago at one of the Safeguarding God's Children, God's People trainings, I was sitting next to a friend. And, you know, they get to that part where they say, this is going to be explicit. And this is going to be very difficult for some people. And I saw my friend curl into a ball and start to weep. And she said, you know, that happened to me when I was younger. And my instinct was to hold her, or at least reach out and touch her shoulder. But thanks be to the Holy Spirit, I didn't. She said later, you know, at a break, I sensed what you wanted to do. And I'm so glad you didn't, because you couldn't have fixed it. And what that would have done would have been, you know, patronizing or whatever. And you may have made you feel better, but it would not have made me feel better. So I think in this time when we are speaking the truth, for those of us who are unharmed or less harmed, and our instinct, like Katya's husband, is to go and fix things, the thing to do is to not, but to sit and listen and try to learn and hear the stories and gain trust that way. And together, when we trust each other, we can move forward, really move forward. The other thing I think that the diocese could do is intentionally look for leaders in the communities. And you know, a lot of people will not say, I think I'm called. They'll wait for people to say, we think you're called. So I think we have to be much more intentional about seeking out future leaders, lay and ordained, in our church, and raise them up and support them as best we can as they're beginning and throughout their ministries. We need to support each other. And in doing that, we will make our diocese, our church, and our communities much more diverse. And in our diversity is our true strength. Since the first apostolic council, when those early apostles were struggling with what to do with the Samaritan and Gentile converts, the Holy Spirit has always been asking us to open our arms wider, make the walls of the church broader, include more people. And that's what we're called to still, to find more strength in diversity.
Greg, thank you so much. And I just want to now open this up to Ruth Ann. What could the diocese do to continue to more fully become the beloved community?
Well, I really want to thank those who have been here at the convention. I think we took an important first step. I think that one of the things you'll hear people of color say a lot is that this isn't the first time. I mean, sadly, all of the deaths that happened, George Floyd and so many others, we've gone through these things. Just 3 years ago, we had a terrible summer of tragic situations. I remember every single weekend. So this can't be like, I feel so hopeful because today we have a new sort of opportunity starting with our next session, because we elected people who can speak to this experience. The biggest fear I think most people of color have, which I sort of got off the point, is that this will just be forgotten again. And then we have to take it up again. So I'm so thankful to have such wise and wonderful colleagues elected to positions where they will be part of that process. Because an experience we often have is that instead of having people of color in a process, people will make decisions for people without actually talking to that community. And that's just never going to work well. So I'm really thankful for that. I would also say transparent processes. We all have in our power to make a change. And as we look at our episcopate, it is changing more rapidly. Those processes are totally transparent. We don't see that same kind of transparency on other levels. So if we want this to be a fair process, let's think about that. How are our, the system itself has to be changed. We can't keep trying to push clergy of color into a system that has never been our own. And thirdly, I would just say, again, high church person here, went to general seminary when everybody was all snarky and we had all the old dons of the church in there. And I got to say that we have to remember that some of those ancient liturgies that we love in our prayer book, they didn't all come from England. They didn't come from whatever, Western civilizations that folks think they can. And so we need to embrace other ideas for liturgies and not denigrate them or say that we're doing this one kind of service, but find these sources from different liturgies from around the world, different music from around the world, so that the church becomes a place that welcomes all.
Thank you so much, Ruth Ann, for that. And now I'd like to ask Vicki, what do you think the diocese could do to more fully become the beloved community?
Okay. I believe that the work that the diocese must do to become the beloved community is that it must take into consideration who it hires to serve the spiritual community. I believe that the spiritual leader should be an example of justice, respect, and good moral characters for the congregation. Being sensitive and humble and guide for God's rules. Should also support the vision and mission of the Episcopal community and not do the opposite of what the Episcopal Church professes. Like I say, I stay in this community because my daughter, she really appreciate and respect and love this community. And I hope that the experience is a lesson for us and that we as a Episcopal community never again allow oppression or any other kind of harm for any woman or any human beings. So I really hope that we learned that lesson.
Vicki, thank you so much. And now I'm just happy to invite Tina to share about what the diocese could do to more fully become the beloved community.
Hi, everyone. I kind of personally opted to not answer the first two questions out of respect for folks who've been in the diocese longer. I've only entered the diocese in 2016. I currently attend Trinity Parish, Seattle, and I'm the children's minister there. But in what I observed of society at large, but the church also, in order to become the beloved community, let me specify who I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to folks who have begun the work of racial healing. Okay, so anyone who is engaged in this work is gonna experience pain. Or let me rephrase that. If you're doing it right, you're going to experience pain. Maybe not all at once, but incrementally. It's just part of the process. Richard Rohr says, we do not think ourselves into new ways of living. We live ourselves into new ways of thinking. And to live into new ways of thinking, we have to fully accept our present reality. And that includes being able to hold sorrow. This I'm sort of perceiving as a real growth area for us as a church, grief, and how to work with it, how to hold it, how to process it. We have to be able to accept and see the cross of the present moment. Wesma Menachem, who's a therapist and trauma specialist, distinguishes beautifully the difference between clean pain and dirty pain. And he says clean pain is when we can walk into the pain, experience it fully, and metabolize it. It's so important to metabolize it, to process it. Because when we recognize, accept, and are able to move through the pain, then we get to the good stuff. Then we get to grow and create room in our nervous system for flow and coherence and harmony. And this processing of pain is what builds the capacity for future growth. And okay, why is this important? This is so important because unexpressed, unprocessed, repressed grief hardens over time in our heart. It becomes self-hatred. It becomes internalized oppression. And this is dirty pain. This is unprocessed pain, right? Now, your racial healing work is fueled by guilt and shame, not love. Now, your anti-racism efforts look like, they're dogmatic and rigid and punitive. And you end up replacing the very systems of oppression that we're trying to change. You just recreate it with a different face, get real petty about the legal aspects of just how so and when it's appropriate. And if we do the anti-racist work from our woundedness, we can't create a community with a culture of healing. We can't. We do work, but it's competitive, it's envious, it's fueled by ego, it's seeking external validation. I've seen so many sort of well-intentioned folks sort of taking this, race work as though they're trying to ace an AP US history class. There's no gold star at the end, there isn't. And, some other manifestations of this are the savior complex. Some other manifestations of this are extreme reactivity under stress, because there's an inability to tolerate discomfort. And this is when the sort of infamous white tears happen, because you haven't processed the pain. In these heightened circumstances, you may have this cathartic or overwhelming feeling of tears. It's not that you shouldn't process. In fact, please, I urge, I beg, please lament, please do the grief work. Because if you don't, then you place all your pain and unprocessed rage at the feet of BIPOC folk who now have the burden of having to absolve you of your shame and guilt. And we have our own problems, truly. No one can absolve you of that. This is between you and spirit. This is between you and source. And so this processing, when we do this work, carrying dirty pain, it just doesn't blossom, Then you may experience distress or rage when BIPOC offers nuance or correction or wisdom. Then you experience feedback as rejection and criticism. Metabolizing our pain allows us to take our rational learnings and convert them into what Cynthia Bourgeault calls heart cognition, which is seeing with the eyes of the heart. You cannot overlook and minimize the power of lament, friends. Lament comes before hope. Lament integrates our rational learning into wisdom. Wisdom is transformative. Data is not. I really want to recommend this book by this author, Resma Menachem, who I referenced, Clean and Dirty Pain. It's called My Grandmother's Hands. Lots of exercises in there to explore different modalities and pathways for healing. But, I just want to reiterate, lament allows us to respond to oppression in transformative, liberated, generative, compassionate, and life-giving ways. And my prayer for our community is that we have the courage to do this work and to begin again and again in deep humility. That's what I have to offer.
Tina, thank you so very much. And now our last person to respond to this question is Hisako. What could the diocese do to continue to more fully become the beloved community?
Yes, thank you, Terry. I think to become beloved community means to develop a beloved relationship, beloved caring relationship. And that starts with the individual, each individual to approach and then open the conversation and invite to somebody who doesn't look like you, to expand the circle of the community and get to know each other. And I think that's how I experience, especially on the Facebook, is that, people expanding because approaching. So that's one of the things that we can do. And then also, as a diocese, we can plan some kind of events, a lot of events. We used to have a lot of fun, let's say, culturally different celebration of, let's say, Chinese New Year, Emagabo, the Native American, what else we have? Chinese New Year, and the Lady of Guadalupe, and we have their hymns to worship, all kinds of things. And when we do that, because I'm from Cathedral, and most of the events are done in Cathedral, and the Cathedral fills up with all kinds of people from all over the diocese, including Cathedral Day, where it's wonderful conversation, wonderful community develop. And that was lots of fun. And you get to know the other people's culture or food, or dances. So those kind of fun things may attract other people who may stay home for other meetings and things. So I would like to resurrect those kind of fun things. And one other thing I forgot to tell you, my last presentation is that Mr. Key, who people don't know because he retired, was managing the print shop. And it was enormous work. But obviously, his employment on the cathedral, diocesan office, and then the clergy, it's a totally different category. And, for this clergy that I went to put all together and say, oh, Mr. Key, who's a Korean, aren't we nice? And that was the point that I was very, very disappointed. So, and then I just want to know this is a question. How many African American priests in the Diocese of Olympia? One you heard, Carla Robinson. She's the only African American priest in this diocese. Think about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Izako. And I just want to right now invite Rachel Tabor Hamilton, who's going to share a few words with us before we conclude.
I want to thank all of you who participated in listening today and given of your time and your attention to hear the stories of brothers and sisters, cousins, aunties, grandmas, those people of color and allies who represent 10 circles of color that are currently active in our diocese and come together as clergy of color, as postulants of color, Asian circle, Black and African American circle, also the leadership circle, Asian circle, everyone, Indigenous circle. As we have these conversations and as we've been together, you've heard some of the excavation that Tina and others have so well described of the emotional work that can be understood as trauma. The people of color are essentially people who have experienced a historical trauma inflicted upon them by dominant culture through time and has not yet ceased to happen. It is an ongoing phenomenon, and you've heard stories of Elsie Dennis and others who shared about when something happened to them long ago in life, it stayed with them all their lives. What we do now and the next steps that we take together as a diocese will not only determine the direction and course of our communities of color, but also will determine the direction and course of our diocesan commitment to one another. In what some have described as the phenomenon of othering people of color, what we want to remember together is that we are the church, and that when decision-making happens in our halls of power, in our commissions, in our committees, we must have the representation of our diversity that is the church represented in the conversations in which they want us to participate in the end result. So the journey that we make together is essentially the journey to Jerusalem. There is no way to get to the Easter event without first going through Good Friday. And as people have described and shared their tears with that, shared with you vulnerably the work that they are personally doing on themselves as a result of historic trauma and personal trauma. That is a history that also influences our white colleagues and allies and brothers and sisters. All of us have been harmed by the history that we share, cast into roles that continue to inflict pain on others and self. We must all experience what it is to create together liberative structures, liberative policies, liberative ways of being together as church. And yes, my friends, the colonial Anglican Church must be open to the influence of its people of color. For you have heard wisdom, you have heard pain, you have heard joy, and you have heard a profound invitation. Let us go to Jerusalem, for we are in the end a resurrection people. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And I just want to say that every time I do an event with my Muslim friends, I always ask them, how did I disadvantage you today as that event is concluded? And sometimes I have disadvantaged them, and I'm still working through my own Islamophobia. But I recognize that when they share with me that I have disadvantaged them, that I've harmed them in some way, that they're actually helping me to heal, and that that's actually baptismal work, that that's a holy event in my life and in my relationship with them. And so just remember your baptismal identity, and let's continue this journey together. So I just want to thank all of our panelists, each and every one of them, for their generosity of spirit, for their trust in all of us, for their love of the church, for calling us in so that the Diocese of Olympia may become more fully the beloved community. And we want to thank all of you for watching, and also thank Bishop Rickel. Thank you for your offering this time today and for hearing these stories. So thank you very much, Bishop.
Thank you, Terry. And I want to thank Rachel and the panelists for your courage, your leadership, your challenge. And I want to admit and to say that much of the harm and trauma that we listened to today, I will admit I have a direct part in. And so I have a lot of work to do. And I think that is the point for all of us. I want the panelists also to know that I watched the numbers as you were talking. And this entire convention has been in place. They did not opt out. They listened to your story. We have the full number here. And we have to keep doing that as a people. In some ways, yesterday may have been the easy part. Some of you have said that, and you said it better than me, but I just reiterate that it will take us now doing the work individually and corporately to get to that dream of beloved community. So thank you for challenging us, for challenging me, and for sharing with us with such courage today.